Hey everybody, welcome to Chapter 4, Section 1. Here we're going to be solving quadratic equations. We're going to be solving them by factoring. We're going to be solving them by doing the square root method and by graphing. Okay, so let's talk about what it means to solve a quadratic function. So here I have my graph, my parabola. This is a graph of a quadratic function. And what it means to solve it, what I mean by solving it is I want you to identify the x-intercepts. Well, the important thing about identifying the x-intercepts is that's when y equals 0, okay? So you see the y-coordinates are 0 there because it's anywhere on the x-axis is y equals 0. So by solving it, you're finding those x-intercepts. X-intercepts are also called roots, solutions, or zeros, okay? And so you can intersect with the x-axis 2 times, 1 time, or 0 times, okay? So when you're doing it by factoring, which is probably the most common method we do in algebra class, if you get stuck on factoring, maybe the function doesn't factor, but that doesn't necessarily mean, oh, it has 0 roots. It just means it's not factorable. But there's a variety of ways you can solve quadratic functions, and we're going over 3 different ways in this video, okay? So just something to keep in mind for the future. Let's get started by solving this one by factoring, all right? When you're doing factoring or when you're solving by factoring, you want it to be in standard form, okay? Standard form, everything is on one side, x squared plus bx plus c, and it's going to equal 0. Why is it going to equal 0? Because you're looking for the x-intercepts. The x-intercepts will make it equal 0. We'll make the y, you plug in the value for x, it'll output a 0 for y, okay? So if it's not in standard form, get it in standard form. I can minus 45 over to the other side, and I get x squared minus 4x minus 45. Remember, nothing combines because they're all different terms. This has an x squared, this has an x, this doesn't have an x, so it just stays like that. So if we're gonna factor it, if you'll recall from, my earlier videos about factoring, take that front number, there's not a number there, it's a 1, multiply it to the back, and so you got to think of what are your factors of, that'll be negative 45, that add up to the middle number, negative 4. So two numbers that multiply to get negative 4 that add to negative 4 are negative 9 and 5. Negative 9 plus 5 is negative 4, negative 9 times 5 is negative 45. So with this, I found my factors. So I'm just going to write over here x minus 9 times x plus 5. And then I'm going to throw on that equals 0. Okay, so when we were doing factoring, it was, you just stopped there. When you're solving it, you just take it one extra step further. Okay, what number can you plug in that'll make this go to 0? And what number can you plug in that'll make this go to 0? Because when you have these two parentheses here, they're multiplying. So when you multiply 0 times anything, it's going to equal 0. So it doesn't matter what's in this if this equals 0. So this is what I mean. X minus 9 equals 0. What number minus 9 is 0? 9. Just flip the sign if it's just an x. What about x plus 5 equals 0? Just flip the sign. That's going to be negative 5. So if I plug in a 9 here, and I plug it in there, it'll make this equal 0. That'll be 14, but 0 times 14 is 0. If I plug in a negative 5, that'll make this negative 14, and that'll make this 0. So negative 14 times 0 is 0. So that's what I mean by finding the two answers. I don't know. I feel like I might be over-explaining it now. So let's move on to the second example then. Here I have a number in front of x squared. So I go 4 times 3, and that's going to be 12. And my middle number is negative 13. So what multiplies to get 12 adds to get negative 13. I know 12 times 1 is 12, and 12 plus 1 is 13. And if I make them both negative, they'll add to negative 13. All right? So I say x minus 12 times x minus 1 equals 0. All right? Now, because I had a number that was 4 in front, and this one I had a number that was 1. I didn't have to do any extra steps, but recall that if you have a number in front that's not 1, I should say, number bigger than 1 in front, or smaller, I don't know, you need to divide it out. So I'm going to divide it out by 4. And so if that fraction reduces, it makes a whole number, it can stay behind, so x minus 3. And if that fraction reduces and stays a fraction, you take that bottom and swing it up front. So 4x minus 1 equals 0. So now I'm trying to find my two answers that make it go to 0. So this one's pretty easy. X minus 3 equals 0. Well, I know 3 minus 3 equals 0. All right. This one, 4x minus 1 equals 0. You might have to do, a little bit of algebra if you can't do it in your head. But let's just add 1 over. At 4x equals 1, so when I divide by 4, I get x equals 1/4, or 0.25. It doesn't matter if you leave it as a fraction or a decimal. But yeah, that's the two answers right there, okay? So what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to pause this video and try these next two on your own. And then I'll go over it as soon as you unpause it. Okay, so in this example, I got 6 and -8 for my final answers. I minus 48 over, and then so now I have it in standard form. Factors in -48 that add up to 2. 6 times 8 is 48, and -6 plus 8 is positive 2. So x minus 6 times x plus 8. So flip the signs, x equals 6, x equals -8. And this next one is not in standard form, so I had to add 12 to the other side. And then so I did 2 times 12, the front number times the back number. Factors of 24 that add to -11 are -8 and -3. And I have x minus 8 times x minus 3. And then because I had a number in front, you had to divide it out. So 8 divided by 2 is 4, and 3 over 2, that didn't simplify, so or it didn't make a whole number, so take that bottom, swing it up front. So that made 2x minus 3 equals 0. So I know 4 minus 4 equals 0, and then if I add 3 over and then divide by 2, I get x equals 3 over 2. I will say this, one little trick I've noticed, if you're doing it by factoring, when you get to this step right here, if you just flip the sign like we did before, like x minus 4, I'm going to flip the sign 4 is going to be the answer. If I do 3 over 2 minus 3 over 2 is 0, see? So if I just flip the sign, I get right to this answer here. So when I do that fraction, it's telling me the answer. The opposite of that is going to be the answer. But since we are solving this by factoring, this is the factored version correctly. If you're factoring and solving, you can just eyeball it from this. Or you can work it out like that. This takes a little bit extra time. But yeah, once you get to this step, just flip the sign. The answer is going to be positive 3 over 2. Okay? But when it factors, it'll look like that. So just, again, I hope I'm not over-explaining it, but yeah, if you look at this other example, see it said x minus 1 over 4, and we swung the 4 up front, 4x minus 1. That's how this is correctly factored. Now, if I were solving it, I know that 12 over 4 makes 3, and so if I plug in a 3 here, that'll make this go to 0, which is what I got right there. And then if I make this 1 over 4 minus 1 over 4 equals 0, and that's what I got right there, see? So you can just keep doing that flipping the sign thing if even if there's a number in front of the x squared. That's all I'm trying to say. Okay, let's solve using square roots. Solving using square roots mean you're going to square root stuff. So what you're going to do is you're going to get everything over, well, you're going to get like x squared by itself. So I don't know why I wrote plus 32. I'm going to do plus 31. And so I have 4x squared equals 49 plus 31 is 80. All right. So now I just divide by 4. And I get x squared equals 20. This is what I mean by the square root method. Once you get it down to x squared, square root both sides. And so you're gonna get x is equal to plus or minus the square root of 20. Okay? So why is it plus or minus? You know that the graph is a parabola, right? So you can plug in two values to get the same thing. I can do -2 times -2 and get +4. I can do 2 times 2 and get +4. So when you're squaring stuff, it'll go positive. So that's why you say plus or minus when you're doing the square root method. And while we're on the subject, if you can simplify the square root, look for a separate video of me simplifying square root, some more examples. But if you can, it's always nice to do that. Square root of 20 is 4 times 5, or 20 is 4 times 5. And why am I writing that? Well, 4 has a square root. The square root of 4 is 2. So you could say alternately that your answer is 2 square root 5. Okay, again, I'm just going to gloss over it in this video, but I will post another video about simplifying radicals. That's what these are called. The square root sign is a radical. So anyway, let's just keep moving forward and not dwell too much on that. 3x squared plus 9 equals 0. Minus 9, minus 9. 3x squared equals -9. Divide by 3. And you get x squared equals -3. So my answer is no roots, because you can't square root a negative. You could say no solution if you want, but again, let's talk about why you can't square root a negative. Let's work with simple numbers here. I know that 2 times 2 equals 4. I know that -2 times -2 equals 4. So if I were to take the square root of 4, I'd say the answer is plus or minus 2. If I were to take the square root of -4, when you're squaring, what two exact same numbers can you multiply to get -4? You can't. It would be 2 times -2. That's it. But squaring, by definition, is multiplying by the same number. Okay? So that is why if you ever get it down to the square root of a negative, the answer is going to be no solution or no roots. Okay? So basically you have a parabola, if you were to look at the graph, and the parabola is just not touching the x-axis. Okay? Let's do the next two. Oh, wait. How about you try the next two? Oh, never mind. Don't do that yet. I forgot I skipped this one. Okay, so there's a fraction on the outside. Let's flip it and multiply. So that'll cancel the fraction. So 5 times 3 over 2, that's 15 over 2, or 7.5. So x plus 3 squared equals 7.5. Now, in the other ones, we got it down to x squared, and then we took the square root. Well, I guess just in this one. This one, you have parentheses. It's the same thing. You're going to square root it. You're going to square root it. And so what that's going to do is you're going to have x plus 3 equals plus or minus the square root of 7.5, I guess. We'll just leave it like that. So how do I make this my final answer? Just minus 3 over to the other side. And so you have x equals, and then you can say it like this, -3 plus or minus the square root of just positive 7.5. So sometimes you get a weird looking answer like that, but that's really all there is to it. Okay, so now you try the next two examples, okay? Okay, so on this one, I minus 14 over, and then I divided by 2 and square rooted, and I got x equals plus or minus the square root of 28. And you could simplify the radical of 28. That's 7 times 4. The square root of 4 is 2. So you could say plus or minus 2 times the square root of 7. In this one, I have a fraction on the outside, so I flipped it and I multiplied it to the other side. That got me 40 over 3. I left it as 40 over 3. And then I square rooted both sides, so I get x plus 1 equals plus or minus the square root of 40 over 3. Then when you add 1 over, it should say minus 1 over, you're going to get -1 plus or minus the square root of 40 over 3. Okay, so with the last one here, you're going to graph it. All you really need to do is just plug it into the graphing calculator. Make sure everything's in standard form. So this one, plug it into the graphing calculator and do menu, analyze, and then go to zeros. And you'll get your two answers of negative 0.568 and 10.6, okay? Look for the video of me explaining this using the Ti-Nspire. But if it's not in standard form, all you have to do, just like, minus this over, type it in, go menu, analyze the zeros, and you get one answer of x equals negative 1, okay? So again, stay tuned for the video explaining the calculated stuff in greater detail, because it is just kind of weird just to read it to you. If you need to pull up a table ever and manually graph some stuff, just hit Control-T. But other than that, I think I'm done. So goodbye.